Welcome to another edition of Cal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show is the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, folks, we have a very full show tonight. We're going to talk about all kinds of different subjects. As I've said before, because it's true, on Cal's Corner, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal, which is a lot of different subjects. And it's not that every show covers all you can possibly imagine. That's not physically possible. But I'm just letting you know that the subjects bounce all over the map, because if you look at the number of subjects that fall under from politics to the paranormal, it's practically infinite. So let's start first by announcing an exciting development on the show, at least in my opinion. I had mentioned to you over several episodes in the past that we will start having some exciting guests, and that isn't just hype. I believe it's really true. So I'd like to announce that next week, in next episode of Cal's Corner Radio here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, we will have famed ace investigative journalist and reporter Art Levine, who will blow open the cover-up and the shocking story that he has uncovered and will go public with on the show a week from today, exclusively on this network, about the scandal involving the Veterans Administration and the problem of opioid prescriptions. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Art will be here a week from now. We'll enjoy talking to him, and we'll give you the scoop. And this is really going to shake things up, I promise you. Okay. Again, we have a lot of subjects tonight. Let's get to them. First of all, a warning to all consumers. There is a company called Under Armour, which makes a very popular app called MyFitnessPal. It's very popular on personal computers, mobile devices like smartphones and tablets, as well as smart watches such as the Apple Watch and Fitbit. Well, if you're one of 150 million odd users, you have been affected potentially because the company has been hacked. And what that means is that your personal data may have been taken by hackers. So the company has issued a statement saying that they are encouraging people to change their passwords. They are stressing that no financial or social security number or driver's license info has been hacked. We have no idea if that's true. The investigation is still going on. But word to the wise, an estimated 150 million users of this food and nutrition application, MyFitnessPal, are affected. And on a personal note, I'll tell you, having just got an Apple Watch myself, I downloaded this app, signed up for it, and this is just my decision. I'm not telling you that you should do the same. Just remember that. I'm going to delete it until they sort this out. Okay, now another advisory for consumers. This comes from Tesla, okay? Tesla is recalling 123,000 Model S cars, that's a huge number, over a faulty steering component. That's how the company describes it. The short version is this. There are some bolts in the steering assembly which apparently have shown advanced stages of corrosion due to the extreme weather conditions that cars are often driven in, or in areas where there's a high amount of, say, sea salt along the coast, California being a typical example of that. So what Tesla has done is they have told consumers they're going to recall the models, replace those steering bolts so that the unit can function properly in all the climates worldwide. So good luck to Tesla for sorting that out. Kudos to them for being proactive about it. Unfortunately, the timing of this announcement is a disaster for the company because there have been concerns by investors about its ability to meet production targets. And as a result of that and this news today, the stock has taken a hit by a few percent. But if anybody knows Elon Musk, like a lot of people do, the guy just keeps going. So you have to give him the benefit of doubt. And God bless his historic visions and his ability to try to grab the future, capitalize on it, and push the human race forwards. We need more entrepreneurs just like that. Okay, let's now switch to a different subject. This concerns the Trump administration's decision to tighten the requirements, if you will, or at least lengthen them, to get a visa to come to the United States. Now, to understand the decision that the Trump administration has made, which I completely agree with, in fact, I think it's long overdue. I'm surprised President Trump didn't do this as one of the first executive orders once he captured the White House and beat Hillary Clinton in the presidential race. We must go back to the administration of Barack Obama, his predecessor, to understand why what he has now done is important and why it's long overdue. Now, to get a visa to the United States, especially from certain countries, like India, of all places, you have to go ahead and jump through a lot of extra special hoops because those countries don't have reciprocal visa policies where they are the same, meaning if you look at people from Europe or the European Union, as a rule, far more than not, they can come and go to the United States pretty much as they please. They don't need a visa. I remember when I lived in Prague, in the former Czech Republic, now called Czechia. They changed the name of their country. It used to be that Czechs had to get a visa to go to the United States. Now, this was during the time that Bill Clinton was still president. And I was at the U.S. Embassy having a meeting discussing this issue. And what happened was once the amount of visa fraud fell below 5 or 3% of all visa applicants, then they qualified for a waiver. And after the Czech Republic joined the EU, they were on the list to be granted a waiver by the State Department. Now, a waiver simply means you can just get on a plane and go. You don't need a visa. You can only stay for a fixed amount of time. You can only be there for a few months at a time, but then you have to leave. Then you can come back and stay for another few months, but you don't need a visa, and therefore they're not really going to screen you. And this, of course, was after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001 by Al-Qaeda against the United States. So even though there was a heightened alert status, European countries were still, as a rule, treated just as they would have been if there had been no 9/11. But then you have a country like India, which is about to pass China in total population. There's about 1.3 billion people there. There is so much fraud regarding visas in India. And India, let's be honest, is the most superstitious, corrupt, and largest democracy on the planet. The corruption is so widespread, and I have witnessed it firsthand in India on several occasions. It's disgraceful. I've also butted in to try to stop some of it. I can share some of those stories later. But to make a long story short, one of the contentious areas in relations between India and the United States is this. There was a debate in the Obama administration as to whether, as part of the vetting process, to check a person's Facebook postings, Twitter postings, essentially social media profile, and to factor that information into the consideration process as to whether to grant that individual a visa. Now, the way that I see it, I think that you should do that. If somebody has a Facebook page and they're calling for jihad against the United States or the West or Israel or whatever, even though they may have no criminal record, they might even have a respectable job somewhere, why would you grant that person a visa? It makes no sense to do that. In fact, anybody who posts hate-driven rhetoric makes a point to lie and smear others, cyberstalkers, whatever you want to call them, especially people who are sympathetic to terrorism and support terrorists and harming other nations. You know, there's many different things you can say to describe such people. Those types of people should not only be forbidden from being granted visas, they should be monitored and watched by everybody from the intelligence community to law enforcement. So in the state of Punjab, which is in northern India, and Punjab also extends into the neighboring country of Pakistan, and Pakistan is absolutely a leading supporter of terrorism. The state of Punjab goes into Pakistan, and then on the other side of the border, it's part of India. This is the result of the partition and the creation of Pakistan after India was granted its independence by the British. And the reason I say that is because India didn't really earn it. They didn't go to war against Britain the way the U.S. colonists went to war against the British. It was granted to them. And the existence of Pakistan was to create a separate nation for pretty much a majority Muslim population. And as history later showed, unfortunately, after the partition started taking place after the end of World War II, there were, of course, millions of people who were murdered and killed on both sides, Hindus killing Muslims, Muslims killing Hindus, Sikhs killing Hindus, Hindus killing Sikhs. It was just been a disaster. And I met several survivors of that. They're quite up there in years now. And the stories that they told of how entire families and communities were uprooted and relocated and displaced in this chaos was just heartbreaking. And it's a story that most people in the West don't know. Most people in the West don't really care about, which is unfortunate. But when you hear these stories, if you have any humanity in you at all, you can't help but be moved. They're as moving as the stories of Holocaust survivors and people who survived the tyranny of Hitler and Stalin in World War II, before and after World War II. So now the State Department has said, we're going to look at your social media postings and we're going to factor that in to determine whether or not you get a visa to the United States. Now, when Barack Obama was president, that was a no-no. In fact, it was a crime to actually check somebody's social media profile, even if they were calling for killing people in the West. Can you believe that? It was considered profiling, racial profiling. That's just plain ridiculous. When somebody posts a message like that out in the public and you happen to see it or you look for it and you find it, that's not profiling. That's reading what somebody has published. Duh. It couldn't be more obvious. But that's how it was under Barack Obama. So kudos to President Trump for changing that policy. God bless him for it. And let's see what happens now. Hopefully they'll catch more bad guys before they can start problems. And you better believe that what you say on social media should be held against you if you say the wrong things. We'll be back after this break.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com.
Welcome back to the Cal's Corner radio show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. So we've talked about the new Trump administration policy that cuts across the entire State Department, where now your social media profile will be factored into consideration before being granted a visa to the United States. Now, I just want to end talking about the subject on a personal note and something that I witnessed firsthand when I was in India for the first time and had moved there and had a visit to the embassy there. Now, outside the embassy, there's a lot of Indians that are always standing around. They're in line and in queues waiting to be called, of course. There's sometimes thousands of them. And when I was standing out there, this is within a few months after I'd first moved there, this was a bit over 7 years ago, what happened was I heard constant complaints, nonstop complaints, from many different Indians who were complaining, if I had to summarize their overall message, that there were uneven standards by the U.S. Embassy and that they were not being treated fairly. I heard story after story after story of people who were highly educated, highly qualified. They wanted to visit the United States. There was no evidence that they were going to play any games once they were there. And yet they were rejected for a visa. Yet I knew of other instances from Indians who would brag about it to me, shame on them, who would tell me that they had gone to India or America under some false pretense. And then they intended to overstay their visas and become illegals and eventually get on the path to citizenship somehow. And they were taking advantage of the looseness, if you will, and the ridiculously inconsistent standards of the Obama administration, where immigration laws, it seems, didn't seem to matter. And this is something that the Trump administration commendably is trying to sort out. I'm not saying they're doing a great job. They're not. The entire government is doing a terrible job. But I was one of the few journalists, and I said this from my broadcasts in Europe before I moved to India on the X Zone Broadcast Network, when Obama promised during his State of the Union address and on the campaign trail that saying immigration was a high priority and what he would do is make a point to pass a comprehensive, quote unquote, immigration reform package in the first year of his office as president. I said it was a lie. And I called him a liar because I knew he wasn't telling the truth, that there would never be such a type of legislation passed. So a year went by and Obama had no major accomplishments in his first year other than putting out the financial crisis fires that actually started when Bush was in the waning days of his administration. But as far as passing any new things, he didn't do it. In fact, if you don't believe me, go back and watch his first State of the Union address that he ever gave, and you'll see that he really doesn't list anything as far as having accomplished anything major. And then he says next year is going to be different. He's going to, pass all kind of things, including, again, the comprehensive immigration reform. And of course, that has not happened still all these years later. And let's be honest, immigration as a subject in the United States is a bad joke. The irony of the Obama administration is that record numbers of illegal aliens were actually deported during his administration, especially the last few years. You would never know that based on the number of illegals allowed to stay as well. So Obama has a mixed record. He has deported the greatest number of illegals. He's also allowed the greatest number of illegals to remain. That's nothing to be proud of. That's something to be ashamed of. And it seems that the Republicans and the Democrats, they don't want to get serious about this issue. It's an open secret that the Democrats love illegal immigrants because about 80% of them overwhelmingly vote for Democrats when they bother to vote. And they're thinking long-term here. I've written about this before because it's the truth, and I'm going to be very blunt with you, as I always am. The days of the Republican Party and so-called conservatism are numbered, let's be honest. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing at all. I view conservatives as extremists on the right side, and I view today's liberals and so-called progressives as extremists on the left side, because they are. Okay? Now, let me give you a couple examples here of the left. I remember growing up as a kid in the 60s and 70s that there were a lot of young people and progressives and liberals who were against the Vietnam War. And they were right to be against that war. They were right to protest against a lot of the things that they were bothered over. 55,000 Americans died for no reason in Vietnam. We should have never been there in the first place. But because this Yahoo president we had, Johnson, said, basically, this is a quote, that I won't be the first American president to lose a war, he made sure that a lot of other people died when we should have not been there. And then Nixon, his successor, Republican, he prolonged the war when he could have shortened it, and that's a fact. And then he eventually cuts a deal and the war ends, and 55,000 people died for nothing. So I understand why people were upset over that. I understand why they were angry. I understand why they took to the streets. And as a young boy growing up, I remember seeing some of this firsthand. I also had teachers who were very much involved in the so-called civil rights movement, and I understand why that movement had to take place, because still more than 100 years after Lincoln freed the slaves, we still had rampant racism. You have to remember that until the civil rights movement came to a head in the 1960s, thanks to people like Dr. Martin Luther King, who, let's be honest, wasn't a saint, you had black and white restaurants, black and white bathrooms. You had people who were black had to sit in the back of the bus. That was racism. It was never right. Racism is always wrong. I understand why people were upset to that and took to the streets, but that never gave them the right to start acting violently, to be intolerant of others. I remember being a member of the high school debate team, the captain of it, in fact. I've never lost a debate on any subject I've ever debated over, because I have one simple rule for debating. You don't debate if you can't win or you don't really know your subject. And I remember people used to talk about things and discuss it, and worst case, they'd agree to disagree. But today, it is so polarized and heated that you find that the left often resorts to violence nowadays, the same violence that they condemn coming from the right. You know, look at Black Lives Matter. It may have started as a relatively benign ideal organization, but it has been hijacked by haters and extremists, and they believe, you just ask them, you can simply Google their comments, that violence is okay as long as you get the result you want. In other words, ends justifies the means, and that is just insane, and it's wrong. You know, look at the Antifa movement. I know for a fact it's going to be documented in a upcoming expose that I will, of course, share with you on the X Zone Broadcast Network, that some of the people involved in the Antifa movement take their orders from the Kremlin in Moscow, because Russian intelligence for decades now, going back to the time of the Cold War, has always made a point to attack American society, trying to make it divisive, trying to make it turn against itself, because they're not going to sit there and launch nuclear weapons. Nobody wins on that one. But hey, if they can get America to implode and Americans to hate each other and not trust their government, that saves them a lot of money. And you've seen with the Russian interference that has gone on and is increasing, that they've succeeded to a degree. They haven't, determined the outcome of a presidential election, contrary to what Hillary Clinton lies and says. But the point is, they have influenced people. You know, if you look at the women's protest march that occurred right around when Trump was put into power, around the time of his inauguration, as I exposed, and I was one of the few journalists who bothered doing their homework on this, when you have so-called feminists who are up there talking about equal rights for women, and their backers support Hamas and want Sharia law imposed, like Linda Sarsour does, she is not someone that you want to back if you believe that women should be treated equally or that people should be treated equally. Linda Sarsour is arguably a fraud. This is a woman who supports the terrorist group Hamas, has relatives in prison for committing terrorist acts, And she believes that Israel doesn't have the right to exist. Oh, excuse me, it has the right to exist, but only as a Jewish minority inside a larger country called Palestine. Well, that's really the same thing as saying that Israel doesn't have the right to exist, because Israel is the one and only state for Jews in the world. Its purpose, its creation, its mere existence is to be a state for Jews. Of course, it allows other people of other religions and races and nationalities to be there. There are Palestinians there, there are Christians there. Can you imagine what the reaction would be if Israel said, nope, only Jews, everybody else is not going to be allowed? They would be deservedly and rightfully condemned at the global level, and they should be, but that's not Israel's view. But yet what the Palestinians say, Palestine only for Palestinians, no Jews allowed, suddenly that's okay? I'm sorry, that's hypocrisy. So what you have is you have these groups. It includes everybody from the Kremlin and their intelligence agencies to opportunists and phony feminists like Linda Sarsour, using useful idiots, that's the best term to describe them, people who are just upset and mad at something. So they say, yeah, go ahead and march for, equality for women. Let's ignore the fact that, I don't support that myself as one of the co-organizers of that movement. I'm talking about Linda Sarsour, but that's exactly what did happen. And because of social media and how powerful it is, you see that this is going on now. It's even going on with the recent gun control march that happened a few days ago. A lot of these young kids are being used by the liberal left-wing Democrats to further their agenda. We'll be back after this commercial break.
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Den.
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school, training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to segment 3 here on Cal's Corner Radio Show. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host. The executive producer of the show, once again, is Rob McConnell. Now, I know I've kind of jumped around on a few different subjects here. Sometimes I do that. But I just want to emphasize again that a lot of this stuff is really interconnected if you take a look at it from different ways. Again, going back to what the Obama administration had done, you could have all kinds of nasty stuff on your social profile and yet still be granted a visa to the United States, even though you're obviously a security risk based on those postings. That was ridiculous, just like it was ridiculous, in my opinion, that police were not allowed to ask if you were in the country legally. Having been to 27 different countries, I can tell you I've seen police come up to people and say, "Can I see your ID, please?" There's nothing wrong with that. They're checking. That's their job. And if they ask you if you're in the country legally or illegally, I believe they have that right. So it really bothers me in America that we become such a politically correct, cowardly type culture now, where you say, oh, he's an undocumented worker. No, he's not undocumented. We know where they came from. He's an illegal alien. Why don't you just call it like it is and quit dancing around the truth? For anyone who knows me, I'm not a politically correct guy, because politically correctness is another way of saying I'm phony. I'm not going to tell you the truth. And that's really a euphemism for what it really is. And I just don't believe in that. I think if you're going to talk, use words. I believe in the axiom that you should say what you mean and mean what you say. So now let's switch to the Middle East, since we started to touch on that. It appears, according to some press reports that are hitting the media from the Middle East, that Israeli stealth fighters, for the first known time, have been flying over Iranian airspace undetected. Now, that's interesting, because if that is true, it's obvious that the Israelis are using the American-made and then Israeli-modified F-35 stealth fighters. And according to the reports, they have performed reconnaissance operations on various Iranian nuclear-related sites. Now, there's a reason to take this report with a little bit of a grain of salt. The problem is that if they're able to travel from Israel to Iran twice without refueling, then what that means is that the Israelis have managed to make some major modifications to the American-made F-35 stealth fighters, giving them that extra distance. And who knows if that's true. What is interesting is that Russian radar systems are so numerous along the Syrian border that they can actually detect Israeli aircraft landing and taking off from airports. Once they're airborne, that's a different issue. But if you are a Russian radar operator and your computer system or radar tracking system tells you that some fighters are taking off, or F-35s are taking off from a runway in Israel, of course they're going up in the air to do something. So the fact that the Russians have achieved that kind of penetration is rather interesting and a potential game changer. It makes it much more challenging for the Israeli Air Force to invoke countermeasures to fight against that. I mean, there is no doubt that things are heating up, whether the Democrats want to admit that or not, between Iran and its neighbors. You've had some game-changing events in that the Saudis now are permitting flights from India to Israel to fly over their airspace. And officially, they've never opened their airspace to Israeli flights at all, but they've now doing it. India has been given first access, again, from Delhi and other airports to Tel Aviv, and they can go ahead and fly over Saudi airspace and have a much more efficient flight route. Also, the Crown Prince, who is the effective ruler of Saudi Arabia, has met with some Jewish rabbis in New York. That's a first as well. So the Saudis' official position, it just hasn't been declared official as of yet, is that Israel is not the threat to the Arab world. that Iran and other radical terrorist-sponsoring regimes lie and claim that it is, that the real enemy is hatred and extremism and intolerance, and as epitomized by regimes like the one that runs Iran. And you must remember that both Iran and the Saudis are regional and ideological and religious rivals. Iran, of course, is Shia Muslim, and the Saudis are Sunni Muslims. They have been gleefully killing each other for over 1,400 years because each side claims to be the truth path of Islam and considers the other side to be essentially heretics and sinners and frauds and liars, whatever description you want to put in there. Just ask a Sunni or a Shia. But at the same time, they all talk about the brotherhood of the Muslim family, but that has not been historically true for over 1,400 years. Thousands and thousands of people have died in this inter-religious war, very similar to what happened centuries ago between Catholics and Protestants. We must remember that in Europe, the so-called 30 Years' War, which really lasted 31 years, and more or less started and ended in the area around Prague and the Czech Republic. This was the battle between the Catholics and the Protestants. About 1/3 of Europe was wiped out, all in the name of God, quote unquote. And speaking of God, there is something very interesting that has come up. Pope Francis has given an interview to a longtime colleague of his, and supposedly he said that there's no hell. Now, can you believe that the day that the Pope says there's no hell, that pretty much blows out of the water the entire reason for the Catholic doctrine, okay? So let me read to you what the Pope was asked and what he supposedly said. And the Vatican's already doing spin on this, denying it, but apparently he really did say these words. So the question from the interviewer, Scalfari, he says to the Pope, "Your Holiness, in our previous meeting, you told me that our species will disappear in a certain moment and that God, still out of his creative force, will create a new species. You have never spoken to me about the souls who died in sin and will go to hell to suffer it for eternity. You have, however, spoken to me of good souls, admitted to the contemplation of God. But what about bad souls? Where are they punished?" Now, that was a question that the Pope was asked. He supposedly replied, and this is Pope Francis's words, "They are not punished," meaning sinners are not punished. "Those who repent obtain the forgiveness of God and enter the rank of souls who contemplate him. But those who do not repent and cannot therefore be forgiven disappear. There is no hell. There is the disappearance of sinful souls." Well, there you have it, folks. To say that this Pope is not controversial is an understatement. He's been controversial from day one. In fact, he is viewed by the mainstream Catholic establishment as being a radical. He's a radical because he thinks that instead of condemning homosexuals to hell or sin, you should forgive them. You should have compassion for them. Do you think that Jesus would say, don't help the homeless, don't feed them, don't shelter them? No, if you believe in the writings of the Bible, Jesus always preached compassion, even towards so-called sinners. Remember, one of his favorite followers and trusted people was Mary Magdalene, who supposedly was a prostitute. So this is rather interesting because when you have the Pope saying there's no hell, well, what do you do with the Catholic religion at that point? I honestly don't know. So the other big news out of Italy regarding Catholicism and Jesus and all that other fun stuff is that a professor has now created a 3D printing of the Shroud of Turin. Now that's the famous burial cloth that supposedly was wrapped around Jesus's body after he was crucified. People who believe in the Shroud of Turin think that the marking or images of this body and the face were burned into the fabric somehow the moment the so-called Holy Spirit rose from Jesus's body, and he, showed up 3 days later to his followers, rising after 3 days, etc. Now, there are people who believe that the Shroud of Turin is really the burial cloth of Jesus. Science says otherwise. They radiocarbon dated the fibers and found out that actually the cloth dates back to the era of the Middle Ages, not around the year zero. So if that radiocarbon testing data is valid, it does prove that the Shroud of Turin is a fraud. However, in fairness to trying to report the truth about the science, it is arguable that some of the dating was flawed, because what they found is that some of the fibers in the cloth itself were intermixed or interwoven with later fibers which were used to help repair it. And if you were to date that fiber, not knowing that it was a mixture of old and new fiber to try to repair it, then any dating that you would try to get from it would be automatically wrong, because maybe a few millimeters to the left or to the right would be a whole different time period. So it is possible that the carbon dating is flawed. What has not happened, as far as I know, and I might be wrong on this, I'm not an expert on this, I don't profess to be, but I've read a lot of the scientific papers about the Shroud of Turin, and as far as I know, there has not been a definitive test to go back there and try to settle this problem, which was found years after the so-called final verdict was in. And if that is correct, then the issue of the shroud's authenticity is still very much up in the air. Now, people might say, well, how was the shroud made? Well, one way to make it is to carve a 3D statue of marble. Then you could treat it with various herbs, spices, chemicals, things like that. You can make a shroud from wrapping that statue and produce the very similar type of image. And after the commercial break here, we'll talk a bit more about that process, as well as show you why this new 3D printed image of the Shroud of Turin should not, under any circumstances, be taken seriously. We'll be back after the commercial break.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howell expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
I'm William S. Peckham. If you enjoy a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love my novel, From Out of the Woodwork. It's the story of a young Toronto contractor, Sean Kennedy, who buys derelict homes, guts them, and turns them into multifamily dwellings. Slums just waiting to happen. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, the house fights back. Former owners unexpectedly come out of the woodwork as he starts the destruction. The apparitions come to him when he touches old books, reads hidden letters, rummages through old boxes, finds a locket, or reads a discovered manuscript of a murder mystery. From Out of the Woodwork will take you from 1899 to the horror of the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001. Check out From Out of the Woodwork on my website, www.williamspeckham.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Kal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. Once again, my name is Kal Korff. I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. You know, I've said it before. I'll say it again because it's true. Time really flies by, at least for me when I do this show. It seems like just when we get started, we have to wrap it up. So let's start to wrap it up in this fourth and final segment. Now, we mentioned in the previous segment that the Pope has apparently said there is no hell. This is rather interesting because according to the Jewish religion, hell is not at all like the Christians paint it out to be. The Christians, you must remember, are kind of infamous by making hell a scary type image, like, you know, you've got people with pitchforks, horns, the devil's very ugly, beast-looking, fire, brimstone, torture, pain, endless suffering, physical suffering, and so on. That's rather interesting because once you die, you don't have a physical body, so I don't know how you're going to torture a spirit, but anyway, that physics is beyond me. But in the Jewish thought, and Judaism is far older than Christianity, we must remember there were no Christians, so to speak, when Christ was apparently alive. Jesus was a Jew. So we're all his followers. The Christianity thing really began in earnest after everyone who was around at that time was dead. And you can view that one of two ways, as that's rather convenient, or it's just a coincidence, depends on your point of view. So the Jewish concept of hell is that when you die, if you're a sinner, you don't repent and all that other stuff, you cease to exist, okay? There's no resurrection. That's it. You cease to exist. There's absolutely no mention of, brimstone, fire, horns, ugly satanic figures, pitchforks, and so on. That mythology later happened during the Middle Ages when people were very easily manipulated. Most of them couldn't even read or write. And what happened is to make hell as unappealing as possible and to scare people. They, of course, made these hideous images. And yet the Old Testament itself says that the devil, Satan, looks rather beautiful, was one of the fallen angels. Now, I know beauty's relative. And speaking of relative, let's talk about the Shroud of Turin. As I mentioned before the break on the previous segment, that a university professor has made a 3D carbon copy of so-called Jesus, allegedly revealing Christ's true features based on the Shroud of Turin. Now, the person who's done this is Giulio Fanti. It's a rather interesting exercise in 3D printing, but there are some really serious problems with this. We must remember that if the Shroud of Turin is not real and it's fake, and there's no scientific evidence to prove it is real, I'm being very blunt with you. You could make such a shroud theoretically by carving a detailed statue first. Then you would wrap that statue in the cloth, and by treating the statue with various ingredients, you could sit there and make a shroud type image, and it would look like it wrapped a 3D body because the statue itself is three-dimensional. Duh, it's basic physics. Now, the issue I have with this supposedly being the true portrait of Jesus is that based on what most people we know looked like at that time in the Middle East, we know that Jesus was almost certainly not 6'2", blonde, blue-eyed, Thor-like figure. That image of Jesus has happened after Jesus supposedly lived and then died and was crucified, or was crucified and then died. Maybe he resurrected after 3 days, if you believe the story. I don't believe the story at face book value because I know there are many errors in the Bible that we could do a whole show on that, several shows. There's even parts of the Bible that are so vague that we really don't know what it really says, and people just interpret what they think is essentially their best guess. So if you look at the contradictions in the story of the resurrection, put them aside, and the fact that Easter used to be the pagan holiday of Esther, and how convenient that Jesus should be killed and rise around that time, essentially the ushering in of spring. It's too much of a so-called coincidence for me to accept it as just a random occurrence. We know that the religions, like Catholicism, have replaced a lot of the pagan holidays with their own. I don't think anybody seriously argues that Jesus was born on Christmas Day. It just doesn't make any sense. In fact, he probably wasn't even born in the year zero. In fact, it was Copernicus who did some calculations and showed that there was an unusual celestial event, a bright star, if you will, that occurred several years before the year zero. Could be that he was born then if he indeed existed. We're not 100% sure of that either, and that's the blunt truth. So, back to this 3D printing. It's nice to make a 3D printing of the Shroud of Turin. It allows people to look at a statue at that point of what the shroud supposedly depicts. But when you look at the face of this individual, it fits rather conveniently or inconveniently, depending on your point of view, what the medieval version of Jesus looked like. And that's rather disturbing, because the average male in the Middle East, even today, doesn't look like Thor's brother. He's never going to do that. That is a European type look. And Jesus, whether he existed or not, was not European. He was Middle Eastern. He was a Jew. That means that he would have dark skin. Now, the idea of a dark-skinned Jesus would be sacrilegious in the Middle Ages. It still would be sacrilegious to white extremist haters who believe that Jesus was white-skinned and blue-eyed. No, he didn't look like Thor's brother. Now, we can't prove it conclusively, but if you assume for a moment that Jesus was born to fit into the people he was around at the time, it doesn't notice any special characteristics in the Bible about him looking like Thor's brother, not even close. So modern scientists have reconstructed forensically characteristics of what Jesus might have looked like, and the first major change they've made is that he had dark skin, because people in the Middle East, they have dark skin. That tends to be a rule. In fact, you can see the basic physics here that the warmer the sun, the brighter it is, the hotter it is, your skin tends to get darker. It's just basic physics. Look at people in India. How many blonde-haired, blue-eyed Thor knockoffs do you see walking around there? Almost none, unless they're, tourists from Europe. Yet, if you go to the Czech Republic, you go to Europe, white so-called Europe, you'll see a lot of white people and very few dark-skinned, unless they're from other countries with warmer climates such as India or the Middle East like Pakistan or even Israel. And Jesus probably had dark black hair instead of blonde hair. That's another genetic characteristic of people in the Middle East who are native inhabitants. It's kind of common sense. And the blue eyes, well, who knows? Most people have brown eyes. So the idea that this image looks just magically like a made-up incarnation that was popular in the Middle Ages is the first red flag that I see in the claim that this is exactly what Christ looked like. And thank God we did this 3D printing of him, because now we can see that he looks just like the Jesus of the Middle Ages. And that is a problem, because it blows its own credibility out the window. And I've read several of the press articles covering this, and it seems that not really any of them are pointing this out. And it's beyond obvious, and I'm not an expert on the subject, but I figure if I could at least see this, someone else should, who's much more of an expert on it. But as far as I know, most scientists and credible experts in this area don't take the Shroud of Turin seriously anyway. So we'll see what happens. In fact, what I think I'll try to do is contact the people who did this, and I think I'll ask them some of these questions, or maybe I'll see if they can be interviewed. We'll give it a shot. I can't promise you that we will be successful. So let's now end our segment on one of my least favorite topics. I'm doing this only because she just won't go away. Let's close this out by talking about the wonderful, greatest loser in modern American politics, otherwise known as Hillary Clinton. Now, recently, she appeared for only $25,000 this time, and she says she's donating all the money to this foundation, not her foundation for once, but this one that furthers, I believe, women and students. Instead of charging hundreds of thousands of dollars like she normally does, she's only charging $25,000. This means she's only going to give up $25,000. If she charged a normal rate, she'd have to give up hundreds of thousands of dollars. She talked about the election again and why she lost. And there was a rather interesting segment of it where a Holocaust survivor had asked Hillary essentially if she thought that a Nazi-type phenomenon could occur in the United States. Hillary, being Hillary, pandering, of course, tried to personalize some of what happened in the election and basically said, the short version of it, that, yeah, maybe it might be possible. That's really ridiculous. You cannot compare Imperial Germany, the Weimar Germany that existed at the time, to the United States. Yes, the United States does have racism. It's got racism on all sides. It's got blacks hating whites, whites hating blacks, Christians hating Jews, Jews hating Christians. It's a mess. But they are the exception and not the rule. And we know that because Barack Obama was elected twice. There's over 10,000 black people in various positions holding public office. In fact, most people who earn college degrees in the United States today are women. So this idea that Trump won only because a bunch of white extremists got together and voted him in, I'm sorry, America doesn't have that many to explain her defeat. The main reason that Hillary Clinton lost is because they didn't like her as a candidate. Many Americans viewed this election as a choice between two lousy candidates. And I argue that if you have a country of 320 million people, which is what the United States has, and the best two candidates you can come up with are Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, then that country is really sad. So the idea that this whole thing was fueled by racism is wrong. Yes, Trump does have supporters among racists, just like Hillary has supporters among feminists who hate men. Okay? But what's interesting is that most white women did not vote for Hillary, and that says it all. So Hillary just has to admit that just enough Americans don't like her. And they don't like her because of the way she's acted. She has not been honest, and she has an untrustworthy rating equal to that of Trump. In fact, she's now more unpopular than Trump.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.